Welcome to Weekend Night Live, hosted by Samuel Jacobs Abbey, where we play music, talk shows, and interviews on Be Inspired Podcast Network. Stay tuned and keep your dial on www.beinspiredpodcast.com. Don't forget to stay connected, be inspired, be unique, and be different.
Welcome, everybody, wherever you are. We're coming to you live from Virginia in the U.S. And thanks to the DC line that John moderates and Be Inspired Podcast Network, we're coming to you right where you are. So, we missed you last month, but this month we're on with a bang. And our topic today is marriage today against culture. Is marriage today against culture? Big question to answer. The two words, marriage and culture, evoke strong feelings. And so we'll see how well we can handle the two, and then we'll come to a conclusion whether one is against the other or the two can work hand in hand. So here we go. The internet, international, and the increasing mobility between countries and continents have, in a sense, shrunk the world as we know it. The world is no longer our parents' world where, to go somewhere was like, oh my, we might not see him or her again. And today, the increasing contact we have using apps and programs such as FaceTime, WhatsApp, video, Instagram, Skype, and Twitter make it seem as if we know people far better than we really do. See, you can, with just a few clicks, you can be talking to somebody, on the other side of the globe. Added to this, dating apps and websites have also contributed to making it much easier to meet and get to know people literally around and across the globe. So while such meetings and interactions bring about a sense of familiarity, they don't tell us, neither do they afford us the opportunity to get to know the actual day-to-day character of an individual. The point is, a posting tells you what the person wants. In effect, people can be attracted to and have created persona rather than the real life person behind the persona on a web page. So without getting to experience a place firsthand, all one has to go on is the image painted by a contact via the internet. The reality, my friends, is that a Google search does not give the full real life experience in a country or about the people of the country, their traditions and culture. It is a fact that nothing beats experiencing something for yourself. Again, we are all products of the culture in which we are born, the one in which we grow up, and the one we now live and work in. And they can all be different. Somebody can be born in China, they grow up in London, and now they're living in the US. Very different. Somebody born in Kenya, grows up in South Africa and is now living and working in Australia. So that person is a product of three different cultures. But even then, you can even think within a country, it can be the same. Somebody born in the south of the U.S. goes to school in California and then ends up working in New York. Different cultures are at play, you know. And so this is one reason why we all need to learn more and strive to experience the traditions and culture of our spouses to enable us better understand them and their actions. So we use the word culture. And before we proceed further, let's tell you how we seek to define culture here. And it's that combination, culture, is that combination of a people's beliefs, knowledge, and traditions. You know, it is what defines a group of people living in a certain area of the globe or people who share a type of heritage. Everything from what people might eat, who they pray to, how they dance, what type of music they make, their social habits, their superstitions, and their set of values. And believe me, people everywhere in the world have their own superstitions. Here in America, many buildings don't have a 13th floor. 13 is bad. In China, it's 8. So there are all kinds of things, in different parts of the world. In some cases, when it comes to culture, the behavior of members within certain cultural groups can be predicted, depending on how closely that person sticks to cultural patterns, you know. And this is what makes us generalize. And that generalization can lead to stereotypes, you know. It's the generalization that leads us to make statements such as, people from a certain part of the country are loud, or those from country X are snobbish. Or here's another one. Women from this area are difficult to please. Or men from country Y don't treat women well. All these statements, which are really stereotypes, can be a problem for relationships. You see. How about tradition? And this is where we get mixed up because we often mistake traditions for culture. But traditions are really a subset of culture. And tradition consists in the passing down of beliefs and practices from one generation to the next. So tradition can be practiced and passed down between two people. It can be passed down within a small group, like your family. In a particular family, they have a Christmas tradition. They sing Christmas carols on 24th of December night. That's their tradition. Christmas is Thanksgiving is coming here in the some families. The tradition is that you have to, once you are alive, you have to go meet in grandma's house, the matriarch of the family. That's their tradition. It's not really, it's a subset of the culture. But tradition can also be passed down within. This is what we do in our community. Every 4th of July, we have a parade. It's a tradition. You become mayor and you don't do it right. The traditions can also be down an entire society. So, in fact, traditions dictate the way we behave on an occasion. The things like how we greet. If you are from certain parts of Ghana, you greet starting from the right hand side and going along. If you go from the left, ooh, no way, that's wrong. That's their tradition. It's part of the whole culture. So, what then is, if you want to talk about a difference, culture is the entire body of knowledge that dictates our human behavior, referring to everything from clothing to language, art, rituals, and beliefs. and traditions are really a part of our cultural identity and practices. This is why people from the same cultural group, like a particular region of the country, can have different traditions. So that's just to help us. But each one of us, therefore, has some cultural identity. And so it's not necessarily the food we eat or the clothes we wear, the religion we have, but often it's what we don't see because it's a lot of it is inside of us. It just shapes the way we behave. We don't really talk about it. We don't say this is our culture, but it just informs and kind of dictates the way we behave. It's what tells us this is wrong or this is right. Like I talked about how you shake hands in a group. It's the values you have about family, money, freedom, you know, and ideas about birth, life, and death. You know, all of these things shape who we are. So, how do these concepts of culture and tradition play out in our relationships? We're meeting, Vivian and myself meet so many different intercultural marriages. And, somebody asked us after we were posted the topic, oh, you're talking about different races? Well, that can be part of it, but it's not only interracial. We're talking of intercultural because two people from one country can really have different culture. It's not necessarily the same because you are from a particular country, then you have one culture. Not necessarily. So with so many intercultural marriages today, how does one handle the expectations of spouses? How do you prepare to deal with these issues that arise from different experiences people have had before marriage? If all these shape us, you've grown up in a particular tradition, this is how you celebrate the holidays, or this is how you celebrate birthdays, this is your tradition. Then you marry somebody else, they have a totally different expectation or experience. What do you do? And then what if two people are from different cultures, they marry, and then they live in another culture, as I'm sure many people have found themselves, even here in the U.S. What can we do to help them? From the definitions of culture and tradition, we've talked about earlier, you would have realized that all relationships are to some extent cross-cultural, in that both parties come together from different families to build a new unit together. For many couples, well, it's expected. Some talk of, oh, he's from a different tribe, I'm from a different tribe. How about different country? How about different race? How about different parts of the country even? All of these we bring into the relationship. For some people, they already expect that there will be differences. But for others, they might find it difficult to understand why the partner doesn't see things the you know. The fact is that each one of us, to a very large extent, feels loyal toward our own culture and traditions. And that's what can make it difficult for us to understand another person's, because if we didn't know anything else, we would think ours is the best. And of course, there are those who also reject everything about their culture once they go to live in another culture, as some do when they leave their countries, for example, or the areas where they've grown up in. But you can see how in a relationship, when two people have different belief systems, these feelings can really influence the way they relate to each other. And if they do not work or navigate, discuss, and agree how they will manage their relationship, yep, those experiences, their different cultures can become a problem in the relationship. So there are things like loss of identity. Who am I? I left my country, I'm living in another country, and then you're marrying somebody from that country. Are you losing who you are? We were at a function once, and there was a grandma there, and her two of her grandchildren came to the function, and each of them was getting married to somebody from another country, not her country. And she just, you know, looked at them in a forlorn way and just turned to, my wife Vivian and said, "Oh, this is so sad. I'm losing my grandchildren." I mean, you could feel the sadness in her. Her feeling was because they were marrying people from other countries, not hers, she was going to lose them. And she was worried they were going to lose their identity. And particularly, she said, "I don't even know how I will be able to relate to my great grandchildren." You know, these can influence us. And that's why for some of you, you might be grappling with resistance from your parents as to who to marry. And some people who may have already married are having to deal with the fallout from one set of parents or one part of the family not being, very excited about your spouse marrying you. But these are realities we live with, and we'll see shortly how we can handle them in a constructive way. But there'll be clashes in things like parenting. You know, there'll be clashes relating to the role of the family, especially the extended family. For some people, their definition of family is what we usually call the nuclear one: father, mother, children. That's it. Nobody else. For others, family is anybody who's related to you in some way. A cousin thrice removed, or in fact, we've actually met people, they're calling people brother or sister, and it just happens that they come from, a particular region. And so, oh yeah, we're related, yeah, we're brothers, we're sisters. This happens. And so all these influence the way we see each other, the way we relate to each other. And it's important that we don't allow these identities to imprison us in relationships, because if we do not open up our world to the one we say we love, who wants to spend the rest of their life with us, then we cannot really bond properly together. So it's important to take the time to listen to how we have got to where we are. What has shaped you? What is your mindset? What understanding can two people reach so that they can overcome the obstacles they face, as coming from different cultures and people who expect different traditions. Here are some of the things you may be working on. We talked about loss of identity, for example. Can I wear the clothes from my country? Now it's cold, where we live. So I can't wear some of the stuff from my country, Ghana. It's difficult to do so. It's just too cold because Ghana never gets this cold. So we don't have the type of clothing for this kind of weather. For some people, the clothing, they identify very closely, with what they wear, and that gives them a sense of identity. If they can't dress that way, they feel lost. You just need to go to an African church, see how some people dress. They don't have to wait for a national day. Sunday is the day they can wear their clothing from their country. They want to be themselves with their people. Or you go to a funeral, or sometimes a wedding. Social events, are great occasions for people to show who they are, not only by their clothes. You get food, you get the way they greet, the songs they play and dance to, all tell you something about themselves. So you can imagine being with somebody, "No, I don't want to hear that kind of music. What are you wearing? What kind of food is this? Oh, this food stinks. This is really going to be problems." It could be a daily disagreement. What are you cooking? Oh, this stinks up the house. No, I don't want this in my kitchen. I don't want this in my house. Maybe that's their favorite food. What are you going to do then? You know? What about some of the things they're used to when it comes to what love means for them? We've met people, for them love means I do something for you. They're not talking about all these feelings and all this. They think, oh, this is all a Western concept. you know. And for them, well, I mean, she should know by what I'm doing that I love her. What else does she want? So we have couples fighting over should we have a night out or should we just stay home? You have one person saying all this restaurant eating is a waste of money. A man should eat his wife's cooking. Why is he buying food from outside? Those are practices we've grown up with. You hear a man saying a good wife cooks for her husband. She doesn't buy food from outside. So this becomes a problem. How are you going to handle this if you don't even talk about it? And then how about dealing with conflict? You know, I grew up in an environment where conflicts between spouses were settled at dawn. One spouse would call, wake up the other, and they would talk about issues. Man, I don't love waking up early. I'm a late night person, so imagine if this is what my wife would do for me. That's going to be even more conflict. Different ways we deal with conflict. For some people, it's just one on one. For others, when there's a conflict, you bring somebody else in. How about with the extended family? A young man went, to speak with his father-in-law about some kind of conflict, and that actually blew up the conflict because in the father-in-law's culture, when there is an issue between in-laws, the younger in-law doesn't go straight to talk with the parent-in-law. It's a no-no. How do you know what to do? Or how would the person know what to do if you don't talk about it? How about chores? The chores we have. Maybe you wonder, what does all this have to do? Because this is life. You're going to get married. Now who's going to do the dishes? Who's going to clear the table? Who's going to take out the trash? you know, these are things that we don't think about, but they become even more sensitive when one person from the family, of one spouse comes around, and suddenly something your spouse does, they don't want to do because they're going to see that I'm the one who's doing the cooking. Men don't cook where I come from, or gee, people. I mean, they shouldn't see that I think it's a woman's job where I come from. You know, different views on gender roles can create conflict. How about kids? Who changes the baby? Who bathes the baby? Who feeds the kids? In some places, this is a woman's job. But hey, the couple could be living in another culture or even in the very culture where it's a woman's job and the man is doing it. This is a no-no. When we got married, it was a no-no. Man, it was crying, say in church. There's no way a man would take the child out. It was the mother who did. So guess what happened? How, was our first child, was crying in church and I took her out. It was the older women who took me to task. You shouldn't be doing this. This is what your wife should do. Wonderfully. Now, fast forward some 25, 30 years, what do we see? Same church, we go there, baby's crying, and you see the father taking the baby out and nobody's saying anything. So culture is dynamic. Traditions, yes, they can change, although they are difficult to change. How about how to handle money? For some people, it's the man who should handle money. So even though the woman is the one who's making more money, the man wants to make all the decisions and thinks the woman shouldn't have any say. People deal with how they value money, how they spend it, can be dependent on the culture they come from. How about language? When we meet in another culture, and we have one common language. You know, you have somebody from France, they meet somebody from I'm going to pull something out. They meet somebody from Argentina. One speaks Spanish, one speaks French. They're talking. Or maybe they both speak English. So that goes for them. It's not a problem for them, the two people. But what about their relatives? What happened? And then, what if? What if one person, and just like this couple, I said, one French, one uh, speaking Spanish, you know, how do you communicate in certain ways? Simply expect that everything will go well. Sometimes you want to express yourself, it's just not there, you know. You have your phone on speaker, please mute it. You. Please mute your phone. Thank you. Which is not that simple, and we need to take it into account. And this is often um, expanded when you have someone, like I said, coming to visit. You know, you have two people, one speaks one language, the other speaks another language, and they get a common one they speak. So they have a kid, okay, one person's mom comes to help. Now, how does the communication go? You know, so dealing with language issues in our relationships is not as simple as we think. And part of the problem is that some of us actually look down on other languages. But we all need to make the effort, you know, learn some part of the language, at least learn, you know, the greetings and how to welcome people, how to ask for one or two directions or to ask for something. You know, it helps. It breaks the ice. At least, you know, you arrive somewhere, could be your first visit, you know how to greet them. And then when they go to the second and third sentences, oops, oh well, this is all I know. You know, everybody laughs. Humor takes away some of, you know, our initial embarrassment or uh, shortcomings. But then at least we made the effort. We're identifying with the people. You know, this is important. And how about social gatherings? How about social gatherings? You know, this is part of us. You know, for some people, it's weddings. For some people, it's funerals. For some, it's, you know, a child naming ceremony. For some, it's a birthday. You can't miss a birthday. You know, is it 16 years for some people? You can't miss it. For some people, it's 21 years. For some, it's 18. What are the social gatherings that are important in your partner's culture? You know, what can, and make sure you are identifying with those as well. But above all these things, it's important for us to be patient with each other because, you know, it's easy for us to expect certain things, but especially when you meet someone, especially when you meet with someone, without explaining some of these things, it can be tough for the person to do exactly what you're expecting. And what we hear as counselors sometimes is is the phrase, "Well, I've told him, I've told her a number of times." But you see, telling does not necessarily mean the person has understood. And we're patient enough to explain to whoever we are with so that they can better understand and better relate to us. And then, well, let's talk about a common example since we're talking about marriage. You know, a common example we've met in our counseling work. We're going to focus a bit on African Christians, for example. You know, today, young African Christians face challenges their parents did not have to battle with, generally speaking. The acceptance of some Western forms of marriage and the way the Christian church conducts marriages has raised new questions and concerns. For example, when is one really married? Is it after performing the traditional marriage rites? And then should should they serve certain drinks, alcoholic especially? And then, we often hear, is it necessary to a traditional as well as a church ceremony before one is properly married? Then what about the balance between personal and parental responsibility? What about the role of the extended family, the involvement in marriage? This is prevalent in some communities. It's not for them. It's not just two people getting married. We are getting married. Our daughter is getting married. Our sister, our brother is getting married. We're all in it. And it's possible that some of you went through this already before you got married. So, here are some things to think about. Customary marriage or traditional marriage is legally recognized. Practically every African country recognizes this. In fact, in some countries, before one gets a marriage license for the civil marriage ceremony, one would first have to be married under customary or traditional law. The problem Christians may have with traditional marriage arises from some of the practices associated with it. There we go, the traditions. In some cases, these procedures may be clearly at variance with Christianity. And so we have people say, we have to obey God rather than men. Here are some of the things, For example, the offer and acceptance of alcoholic drinks. Some Christians say, no, we don't want anything to do with alcoholic drinks. Okay, but you're going into a family, they want alcoholic drinks. What are you going to do? In some families and traditional areas, the prayer consists of the pouring of libation and offerings to ancestors and gods, not the Almighty or Yahweh. So this can be a problem for some people. And then, in several cases in traditional marriages, the unity or oneness of the spouses is undermined. Now, here's the reason. Some cultures do not understand the husband and wife as one. They don't regard the husband and wife as one. Each of them still belong to their different extended families or clans after their marriage. As such, the in-laws may prevent them from doing things together, such as joint ownership of property. So you have situations where, the couple want to buy land and one, part of the family, they're saying, no, you have to register it in your name alone, No, it shouldn't be both. This Mr. and Mrs. thing, no, we don't do it here, In traditional marriage also, divorce may be easily allowed. For example, for childlessness, And then there are also in some cases the intervention of elders making divorce more difficult than in civil law cases. They'll do everything possible to keep the marriage together. We've heard about some places where the very people who sit together to contract the marriage have to come together to dissolve it. Now, what if one of them dies? And there are those for whom high dowries have prevented from getting married at the right time. Some have even eloped or they've been pushed to live immorally outside of marriage. And then, as we said a little earlier about children in some traditional marriage become the principal goal of the marriage. The children belong to either the man or his wife, not both. You see, this can be a problem. So if the children don't belong to me, should I discipline them? Should I use, my money to educate them? This can present some complications. And it's important that a couple come to their decision as to what they're going to do rather than simply go along with what the traditions or with the traditions of where they come from or the culture that exists there. And then for some customary marriage, there is the possibility of excessive interference by in-laws. because they have access to everything, and it depends on the area. You know, this can happen. And one key aspect of traditional marriage is that it's polygamous in nature. And so for those who say, nope, I'm not interested in polygamy, then you have to think twice if you're only going to get married traditionally, you know. And when we say polygamy, it's the man being allowed to marry more than one, not the woman getting a second husband in addition to the husband she has. So really, women, are on the losing end. And then another critical aspect of it, inheritance may be determined by the family head. This is very important because a surviving spouse and children do not automatically inherit the spouse, the deceased. You know, in some places it's the family head who will decide. So and so, yep, you are the heir. It's not necessarily the surviving spouse and children who will automatically inherit what the deceased had. So what then should be the attitude of Christians to customary marriage, traditional marriage? We can recognize it as genuine marriage despite its shortcomings. It is marriage. But since people have strong ties to their traditional roots and cultural practices, it's important that we come up with a practical alternative incorporating the biblically acceptable aspects of traditional marriage. We can't completely throw away our culture. So we need to have the Holy Spirit's wisdom to enable and use us to modify those traditional practices that aren't helpful, especially the ones that are oppressive, particularly to women. And older Christians who are parents or elders in their families have a key role to play here. There are times when we've shared with people, the Bible records marriage. It doesn't tell us it was a Christian marriage, and we find that there are elements in it that are consistent with some of our cultures. For example, when you read Genesis chapter 24, you have the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, and Abraham's servant going to look for a wife for Isaac. And he presents gifts, jewelry, other things, not only to Rebekah, the bride, but also to her father and to her brother. We see this in several cultures, And so let's think of what elements we can incorporate from our culture that are good. There's things that we ought to, really fight against. For example, when a man dies, should the widow be buried with him? In some places, she also, where there's a cremation, she also has to die on the funeral pyre. I mean, why should this happen? What about the children of that union, for example? So we need to dialogue about these things way before there's marriage to know what we're getting into. And if we're already in the marriage, let's think of what things we need to discuss and agree on now before it's too late. Having said, some negative things within within some of our cultures, it's important to note that there are many cultures and traditional practices, cultural and traditional practices, which are positive. For example, there's several cultures where there's a sense of belonging. The communal way of doing things makes you feel that you belong somewhere. You don't stand alone. So it's not two people going to a registry to get married and that's it. Boom. Families come together. In fact, in some cases, it's four or more. You see, so the man has two parents. Okay, so we're saying, oh, okay, that's one family. The woman's parents, that's another family. Hey, the man's mother comes from one family. His father comes from another family. Her mother, her father, That's already four families coming together. That's why in some cultures a wedding can never be small. So you say, oh, we just want, some like 20 people and everybody's fighting you. If you understand that for them, it's we are getting married, not two people, then it helps. And some of the fighting can be taken away. And how about, the support for bringing up children? you know, Many traditional practices, give us the phrase that has been popularized worldwide now. It takes a village to raise a child. Everybody's part of it. One of the things I love about my Kenyan friends is how a village comes together to have a harambe, which is like a fundraising event to raise money to send away a son or daughter from that village, from that town, to study somewhere else. They're going for higher education. They need money, and they come together to do it. This is great. This is wonderful. Otherwise, that person might not become who they could be. Or as the saying goes, they will never achieve all that they can be. There are in certain cultures also the provision of a forum for resolving marital conflict. Some traditional areas, for example, assign a father and mother to the spouse who comes from outside that culture, you know, so that they then also feel they belong. In fact, that person represents the person coming from outside the culture in negotiations around the marriage. I was once visiting Zimbabwe, and I was privileged to be part of that because of somebody, from marrying a Zimbabwean lady, and a Zimbabwean friend of mine, had been designated as the father of this young man, and I happened to be visiting. So he says, "Oh yeah, you're from Ghana. Why don't you join our delegation?" That was cool, and just being part of it and observing how they did it. That's wonderful. You know. So what can we do to improve some of these things so that we go from, fighting what could really be experiences, and how can we work towards um, easing some of the difficulties for our spouses or the people we're in relationships with. You know, we need to understand that relationships are different for everyone. And what works for one couple might not work for another. But it's always important to remember that there was a reason you started your relationship in the first place. So here are some tips to consider. First of all, every one of us should be open to learn, understand something about our spouse or our significant other, as the saying goes, or the one you're in a relationship with, or maybe the one you're talking to. You know, what is it about them? Spend some of the time. Talk about how it was for you growing up. Some of the traditions you have in your home. Who does what? What role does your father play? What role does your mother play? What will you expect of your partner? Or what do you expect? So don't expect that things will just fall in place because you love each other. No. And being open to learning comes with respect. You have to respect not only the person, but where they've come from. Looking down on a particular culture is a sure way to disaster. You're only going to bring problems on yourself. And even if, whoever you're with is the foreigner, you're the one who's the native, as the saying goes, you should see the relationship as a merging of cultures rather than that person adopting yours. Let me say that again. It's important for us to see our relationships as a merging of cultures, different cultures coming together rather than whoever you're marrying simply adopting yours. You know, this is important. And so you respect the differences, learn about them, and then see where you can come to an agreement. The prophet Amos has a simple saying. Amos chapter 3, verse 3. You've heard us say it before. Two do not walk together except they agree. What do you agree on? Which will help you navigate your life together, you see. And it's not always you will agree on everything. In fact, it's likely you won't if you have different cultures or traditions you've come from. Even people who've grown up in the same area come from two different families. And chances are they may not agree. In fact, they will not agree on everything. But in addition to learning about, you see, I can tell you all about how I grew up and my expectations and everything. I could tell my wife all that. But nothing can replace having first-hand experience of each other's cultures. And especially for those who meet and marry or want to marry in another country other than their own, it's important to visit each other's home country. Learn something about the language, like I said, read up, ask questions, but at least experience it. It's important. Experience it for yourself. Don't just watch the video. Make your own experience. Then another thing that will really help is that pass on both cultures to your children. Now, some of you might argue with this, but don't forget the children also need an identity. You can decide maybe you're from two different countries, your children are born in one country and you want them to take only that um, culture. But don't forget, you have one, your spouse has one, and they might actually benefit from both. And so instead of seeing, you know, everything else as not necessary, we want our children only. Let's say you have somebody from Nigeria, you have somebody from um, Gabon, they've met in the U.S., they married, they're having children in the U.S. Yeah, your children can be, they are American, but hey, what about where you come from? Are you embarrassed about that? Why can't your kids know about that? Why can't they own those also and make it part of their own heritage? You know, it helps. It actually broadens their world, and you can draw positives from them both. And by the way, you know, children being bi or multilingual is a plus. You know, all this talk about, oh, they will have an accent and all that. It's very funny. You know, you meet people from different countries, they're speaking with their children, and then I know people from certain countries, they only speak English with their children because they're in America. And the children really don't understand the heritage. They don't feel like they have one. So it's up to us, the parents. Maybe we ourselves don't like where we've come from. Perhaps that's the real reason, but we can discuss that in question time. Another thing to note is that it's important, rather than letting your differences divide you, see your differences as a good thing that can enhance your relationship. What do I mean by that? It's a different way, you know, you cook a certain meal, or it's a, you know, you dress differently. Well, why don't you learn that one too? You know, or it's a different way you celebrate Christmas where you come from. What about where your spouse comes from? Hey, how about pulling elements from both? Think positively rather than looking down on where they've come from. And here are a few things, you know, to think, a few other things to think about also. Appreciating another culture is important. It's easy for us to think that ours is the best, like we said before, but let's remember it might actually enrich our world if we learn about another one. So this is one reason why we encourage people to go through pre-marriage counseling. And even if you're married already, it's helpful to talk about your backgrounds. In fact, when we have marriage seminars, one of the most popular topics we've had is acceptance, which deals with, among other things, the differences we have in our backgrounds. And it always generates a lot of discussion, and people begin understanding themselves more. Oh, so that's why he does. Oh, so that's why she's. Oh, I get it. And maybe they live for 10 years, but they're now confronting or, asking each other these things or sharing these things, for the first time. So think, what brought you together in the first place? Often it's more than simply love. And what is good and positive about your relationship? You know, the differences you have, how are they affecting your relationship? And then how can you balance your own cultural beliefs with those of your partner? You know, can you create your own blend? Because that's what you really are. You are a blend, the two of you. If the two become one, you are a blend. You know, and then what's the future going to be like? That's a more important question. Are we still going to be separate in our thinking, in our way of doing things, in our way of looking at things, or are we going to bring our minds together more now that we have understood that yes, we can pull something positive from each culture? And then my last question, what values would you want your children to have? What values would you want them to have? So let's close out with this. For those who are not married, here are some before you actually get married. First of all, the rights of spouses. What rights will you have as a spouse, particularly regarding children and property? Talk about it now, not when the children have come, not when you're already married, you know. And then, how would you want to identify, your children? How would you want them to identify? With one, with both, or with a third one? That's your decision. It's not ours. And then what about the roles and responsibilities of husband and wife? What will be your role as a provider, as a homemaker? You know, how will you share duties in the home, chores? This is particularly important, as you said earlier, so it doesn't create problems when relatives come to visit. How about holidays, festivals? How will you celebrate them? If you're marrying outside of your culture, there may be holidays or festivals you are unaware of. You don't want to offend your new in-laws or your in-laws to be by being culturally ignorant. So educate yourself on these important holidays, festivals, and events in your partner's culture. How about extended family involvement? In some cultures, as you said, extended family has just as many rights as immediate family members. Talk to your partner now about how you want to handle family issues in general. This is important. Do it now before you get into the marriage. And then, what about raising children? How will you do it? Um, will the parents be involved? Will the grandparents be involved? Ask those questions now. And if you're marrying, into or have already married someone who already has children, how about the issues with a step parent? There'll be issues with discipline. All these are important. It's important to get on the same page before you get into the marriage. And if you're already in the marriage, if you haven't really seriously discussed these questions, it's a good time to do so. So, let's go back to our question. Is marriage against culture? The short answer is no. The long answer is that not dealing with cultural issues is setting yourself up for a lot of heartache. And the wise couple raises or discusses issues and does so with respect and with an openness to learn and then to take up that which will strengthen their own relationship and give them a happy marriage. Thank you so much for listening. And now we open for questions. Thank you. So, John or Sam, if you're on, go ahead and we'll start with questions.
All right.
Thank you so much for
The
that
floor is open.
powerful presentation. John, you can go ahead.
No, you go ahead because I figured the floor was open. Mr. Crabbe already said it, so go ahead. If anybody brings it in, I'll also bring it in.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for that powerful presentation with regards to culture and how it impacts our marriages. Scrub, you always deliver it, and we are so grateful for the opportunity. Couple of questions have come in. The first question that I have here, it's actually coming from Somalia, and it says here that uh, the real problem is not about culture because culture is a way of life. But in my opinion, I think the real problem is our appreciation of culture and our understanding of how culture fits through our marital life. Mr. Crab, do you think that the problem is culture or it is lack of understanding of the role culture plays in our marriages?
Interesting question. I think your answer is in your question from Somalia because your first statement that you don't think culture is the problem, but lack of appreciation, carries some weight. But as we presented, there are certain cultural practices that can fight against marriage, especially when it comes to the oneness between husband and wife. And unless you want a polygamous marriage, you don't want only to be married, the traditional way. You want to have some safeguard, that you're not going to find your husband going to get a second wife, for example, if you're a woman. And then we did talk about some property and inheritance issues. So yes, not understanding culture and especially the traditional practices that go into a culture and especially regards marriage can be a problem. We've actually heard people, the way they view dowries, for example, they say, well, why should a man be selling the daughter? It's not selling the daughter. I mean, a dowry is not, selling the woman. Perhaps that's the understanding, but this is something the woman takes into the marriage. And in many, many traditional areas, that money actually goes to the woman. It's not something the father takes in exchange for the daughter. Yes, there are places where the father takes it. There are places where it has to be a cow or cows or some other livestock or huge sums of money. And we already pointed out that these can create problems for marriage because they make it difficult for young people to get married. And that's why people elope or they actually begin to live together, especially when they are far away from parents, like in another country or even in a big city and parents are in the village. So, our understanding of what is expected of us culturally is important. And that's why we need to learn, whether we're living abroad, as we say, or not, whether we're away from our countries of origin or not, we need to learn because these things make us, they're part of us. And there will be people who will ask, well, what about our own children? What will we pass on to them? So that's why it's important for us to learn. But yes, it's true. It's not only, the lack of appreciation of culture that can be a problem. there are actually certain cultural practices that can also be a problem in marriage. Thank you.
Got you. Got you. Great. Since we are already in East Africa, another follow-up question coming from Namibia. And it says here that, well, the tribe that I come from, gender plays a pivotal role in marriages. Women are often considered as inferior to men. I live in North Carolina right now, and I'm married to a white lady. Um, we always have our own issues. Yes, we are able to overcome our issues, and we've been married for 4.5 years now. Uh, the problem I have is she doesn't seem to understand my culture, and I also refuse to appreciate the fact that she doesn't like to cook, and East African men don't cook. This has been a big problem in our marriage. We pretend as if it doesn't exist in order for us to enjoy our peace of mind. So, Crab, do you think I'm making a mistake or I'm sitting on a time bomb that will explode one day? Thank you.
Mrs. Crabbe will take this up.
The question is, did you people talk about these things before? Did you explain anything to her? Did you try to learn about her culture also? It depends. It could be you could come from a place where men don't cook, but you can cook in your house. It is not a problem.
And it does not make you less of a man.
Exactly. So it depends on the two of you. The way you are saying the thing, both of you are refusing to learn each other's culture. I don't know how the oneness will come. You have to learn from each other and understand. And of course, if you have a culture where women are inferior, of course, it's not going to be a good thing for your wife. It will not be a good thing for anybody anyway if women are inferior. We are all God's creation. God loves us. He treats us the same. So we have to learn from each other and learn to accept each other's culture. The only way you can be together for a long time is to accept each other, learn from each other's culture, see the good things in each other's culture, pick those. And if there are some that you feel this one is not good, you can take those out. But learn from each other's culture and pick up the good things. There are good things in everybody's culture which you can work with.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's come to Virginia. And Virginia says here that good evening and thank you so much for sharing light on this topic. You know, initially when I saw the flyer and announcement and we talk about culture, my mind went straight to traditional cultural activities. But after listening to Mr. Kerr, I have a different perspective of the subject matter altogether. Oh, so it means that even the choice of food we eat even creates a marital problem. I've never thought about it that way, probably because it hasn't happened to me. So, will you be kind enough to explain in details how culture can wreck your marriage if you don't pay attention to it? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. Well, the the one thing for each one of us to watch out for is pride misplaced. You know, we can be proud of where we come from, but when we begin to think that, you know, the where my partner comes from, where my spouse comes from, they're no good. You know, they're lower than us. That's a problem because that will reflect on how you relate to the person. So this is really, really important. And one of our favorite passages you've heard us use before is from Philippians chapter 2. Vivian will look it up and read. Actually, let's first read the Romans 12:3, and then we read Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Because it says, Romans 12:3 says, we should think of ourselves highly, but not more highly than we ought. We also consider that, hey, you think you're a prince, somebody could be a princess too. There are good elements in every culture. So Romans 12:3.
Romans chapter 12, verse 3. For I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. Amen.
Amen. And then you can open Philippians 2:3 and 4 whilst I continue answering him. So the first thing is, respect. We have to respect each other. Respect involves me thinking he has something useful to offer to me. She has something useful to offer to me. The moment we think, without me, he's a nobody. Without me, she's a nobody, we're in trouble. And, my way of doing things is the best. There is, I think it's a Ghanaian proverb that says, a man thinks his mom's soup is the best until he tastes another woman's soup. You might think yours is the best until, oh my goodness, I didn't know there was some food like this. The people who have grown up eating salsa, now they eat pizza. They all sound the same. Salsa from Zimbabwe, pizza from US. But now they're more in love with pizza. Does that mean salsa is no good? No. But when, somebody from Zimbabwe meets an American and the American thinks, what kind of food is this? Ew. There's a big problem. You may not like my food, but hey, that doesn't mean I am a useless person too. What does Philippians 2:3 and 4 say?
Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Amen.
Amen. So don't only look out for your own interest. How about the interest of your spouse? And this is important. You want to celebrate Christmas will be next month. So let's use it. You want to celebrate Christmas a certain way, or maybe you don't. But hey, maybe your partner, maybe your girlfriend, your boyfriend, the one you're talking to, your spouse, maybe they want to. Don't only look to your interest, look to their interest as well. How about birthdays? We were talking to somebody and he said, I don't even remember my birthday. But this person is married to someone. This is a guy who says, I don't remember my birthday. He's married to a woman who loves birthdays. You see. Does he decide, therefore, that she should not celebrate her birthday? If he doesn't want to, she wants to. And it's not only men. We've actually met. We know a woman who doesn't remember her wedding anniversary. Her husband does. And in his culture, hey, this is important to celebrate a wedding anniversary. She thinks, it's another day. I'm just grateful we are still together. And he wants to celebrate. Does that mean she should stop him? No. Why don't we do it together? It's us. The more we think us and not only me, the better it will be for us. You want to add something?
You see, the natural human being thinks that whatever I have is best. All others are inferior. Even the Bible says that Proverbs chapter 16 verse 2 says, all the ways of the man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. So our ways are so great in our own eyes until we meet another person then we have to humble ourselves and learn. If we learn, if we are prepared to learn from each other, we will enjoy our marriages. It will be rich. We will enjoy it.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. The other question here, it's coming from Pennsylvania, and it also says that, uh, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Crabbe. Thank you so much for sharing this thought with us. The issue of practicing religious belief on day-to-day basis wasn't a problem at all for my wife and I until we decided to raise our children. I am a Muslim and my wife is a Christian. We were happily married for 17 years until we started having children. And then the issue of how to raise our children culturally became a problem. My wife feels that our children should be raised in a Christian way. And I also thought, well, why not the Islamic way? Because it's all unto the same God. This created a lot of problems. I know religion is sensitive when it comes to culture. What will be your advice for those who are yet to marry or those who are married and find themselves in a similar situation? Thank you.
This is something I thank you for asking us to say to those who are yet to marry. These are things you talk about before the marriage. You decide on these things. Two religions, woman from another religion, man from another religion. They are things you talk about. And if you think that you cannot agree on it, then you go your separate ways. It is not, after you have married, you have even lived 17 years before you started having children. Now you are in a bind. And it's a problem. You have to talk about it. But it's more difficult now that you're already in it than before you get in. So you have to discuss these things. Talk about them before. Don't keep quiet and think that things will flow in a certain way. Sometimes some people say, oh, let sleeping dogs lie. They will wake up. So you talk about it before the marriage and decide what to do and make sure that you are seriously agreed.
So for now, you're already in and you're having these issues. You still would have to continue and come to some agreement. You can't just, keep hanging. It's going to be tough, but this is where now you're going to really ask some hard questions of each other. Because it's not only the two of you now, you're only dealing with the lives of your children as well. And just like you're saying, you want them to have, a sense of belonging. You don't want them just to be there. You want them to have what you have. So this is really important that you do continue the discussion with your wife. Don't leave it hanging and come to certain agreements. There will be areas of agreement, and the ones on which you disagree, the points will be, are they strong, so strong that we can't give up? You see. Or, well, I'm okay, well, this is okay for me. And if you find you still can't make headway on those, that's when you might need a counselor to work with the two of you so that you do come to an agreement. Because especially as parents, you need to get on the same page to raise your children. Rearing them, they will need your agreement. So you don't confuse them and confuse their identity.
One question we would like to ask you, if you lived for 17 years and there was no problem, how were you handling the situation? How were you doing it? So why has it now become a problem now that the children are in? We need to know.
I think that the message that he sent, he had mentioned that it wasn't a problem until the children came in because the wife decided that the children should be raised in a Christian way, and he feels it's the same God. So why only Christian way? Why can't they take both the good teachings of their faith, both Christian and Islamic faith, to raise the children? Because after all, every religion has its good and the bad side.
So maybe they never talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
She went to her church, he went to his mosque, and they never discussed. That is where the problem is. If the coming of the children is now becoming a problem, they never talked about it. Everybody did his or her own thing, and they were okay with it. Nobody questioned the other person. That is where the problem is now.
Right. Okay. There's work.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot of work. Okay, so this one it's coming from Zimbabwe. That's an interesting one. Yeah, Zimbabwe, and it says that I'm originally from Zimbabwe, but I am here in Canada. I live in Canada, in Ontario, Canada. I came here as an immigrant, and I got married to a French Canadian. Of course, I could not speak the French language, and she does not really speak good English. But you know, traveling matters. You know what I mean. In order for me to settle and to get my documentation, we got into relationship, which eventually turned into marriage. But every day there is a problem because there's a cultural differences between us. All this time we've been able to sustain our differences, and we've been married for 4 years since I became a permanent resident in Canada. My question to you here is that is it patience, tolerance, or just understanding of culture? Because I don't know which one I applied that helped me to stay in this relationship for 4 years. But somehow I've survived 4 years. What do you think may have been the secret?
I don't know what you were doing. But I mean, maybe you use the word, so I'm going to use it. Maybe you were more tolerant because you were in a vulnerable position, and because you're more confident. Everything you've got, so to speak, you're more confident now, and that's something we need to be careful about, so we do not trample on the one who has helped us to settle in this way. Because otherwise it might be, oh, you really didn't marry me because you loved me. It was because you wanted papers. So if you were tolerant in that time, why were you tolerant? Was it because you loved this person and really wanted to be with the person? And if you did it for other reasons, now you're with the person, now you want to be with the person, the question to ask yourself is, how can I understand this person better? If your wife doesn't speak English very well, what about you? Do you speak French well? Or even you don't speak French well. But somehow you got together, so some language is going on. Is it only the language of love that's getting you by? Somehow you're able to communicate. So why don't you, let's say, why don't you begin to learn more French? I don't know where you live. Why don't you begin to learn more French? And then you can encourage her also to learn more English. See, I used not to speak French, but it was some friends who encouraged me to speak French. And we would meet for meetings. And there was one of them particularly who would sit next to me, and he was from Senegal. And he said he wanted to improve his English. So he would speak English with me, and he would make me speak French with him. It was tough, but gradually I could see us improving. He passed away. And there's another friend who's from Mali. He also wanted to improve his English, and he also took on the role of my late friend from Senegal. Today we're still buddies. We're really good friends. My friend Hamidou in Mali, and myself. When we meet, he speaks English with me. I speak French with him. Out of that, I was encouraged to learn more French, and now I can speak much, much better. You see, and my friend Hamidou can speak English much, much better. We met not too long ago, and I was, uh, congratulating him for how well he was speaking English, and he was congratulating me, on my speaking French. Now we're two men, we're just friends. So imagine, as spouses, you have even more opportunities to learn each other's language. I remember it was one of the points we made about language, that it helps when you can learn each other's language. You know, it really helps. Language brings people closer together. There's some jokes you can't even share because you don't understand the language. But understanding the language, you find it is going to draw you closer. So if it's French you have to learn, my brother from Zimbabwe, begin to pick up some. And then you encourage her to, maybe you can speak French with her and she corrects you, and you encourage her to speak English and you correct her. Before you realize, you're both much more fluent in each, and your relationship is improving. But it's not only the language. Talk about the differences that you have, as well as the positives, the ones you share. There's certain values you share, there's certain values you need to learn about from each other. What are some things about Zimbabwe or Zimbabweans she needs to learn? Whether you're Shona or Ndebele, those things you have to talk about. What are your expectations for her as a wife? And she might tell you her expectations as a French Canadian woman for what she wants to see in her husband. These are the ways we draw closer to each other as husband and wife. They're part of what brings us one and makes us one. So more power to you. And I don't know why today I was using Zimbabwe as an example. I didn't know why. Now I understand. We got two questions from there. Thank you so much.
All right, great. Hey, John, do you have any question, any further question from your end? Okay. So yeah, I have three more here. And this one is coming from Ghana, from Kumasi. It said, "Well, thank you so much. You eloquently handle the subject on culture and the role it plays in marriages. Well, here in Ghana, now because of Christianity and churches, it looks like the issue of culture is not talked about, or it has it has not become more of a problem like it used to be in the past. I am an Ashanti married to an Ewe, and we get along well. We don't have any problem whatsoever, and in fact, I don't even remember that my husband is an Ewe and I am and Ashanti. We get along well. But interestingly, though, when I meet with my friends and we are talking, they always bring the cultural biases in marriage and how women treat women and how Ashanti women treat men. I don't seem to see that in my problem, in my marriage, but people keep talking about that social differences. Is there really a social difference, or I am too naive that I am in love and so I don't pay attention to these things? I've been married for a year and a half now.
Enjoy your marriage. It's sad, but quite often it's those on the outside that begin to create the problems for the couple. Like you said, you have not been thinking of your husband as ever, and you, Ashanti, you're getting on well, you've been enjoying your marriage a year and a half, like you're saying. People are whispering into your ears. Be careful that their whisperings do not take over your mind, and you begin to see problems where there are no problems. They're telling you every man treat women this way. Is that the way he's treating you? Obviously not. So why even, encourage those? It might help you to let your friends know my husband is different. And yes, let them tell you you haven't been married for long. Enjoy it now. Before you realize it, you would have been married 10, 15, 20 years, and you're still making it. I think Vivian would like to share our own journey in, cross cultural, cross tribal, cross everything kind of marriage.
People will always tell you stories, and some of them to discourage you and everything. It is what you make out of the marriage. Everybody has something against one culture or the other because we all think ours is the best. So anybody can have any ideas and suggest to you what can happen. Live your life, and thank God you are Christians. So Christ is the one who is guiding you. None of those things will happen. In fact, some of those things doesn't even exist. But people have some crazy ideas that they talk about things. I've heard someone say somewhere that if you marry an Ewe, by all means you will marry another person from their hometown. That's a lie. It's not true. And people say such things. People believe that one culture is something. Some people even say things like Ghana men don't know how to take care of women. It's not true. There are people who are girls who are taking good care of their wives. People say all kinds of things. It depends on the two of you. Don't have any fears. In fact, live your life in a way that people will see that Christ is glorified in your life. When we got married, it was very interesting. My husband, the mother is Fanti, the father Gan. My mother Ewe, my father Gan. All the people, it wasn't working well. The Fantis didn't trust the Ewes, the Gans didn't trust the Fantis, the Ewes didn't trust them. Nobody trusted anybody, And people thought that our marriage was not going to work. They were waiting for it to collapse. But we set out to be an example. We prayed and asked God to help us that our marriage will be a living testimony to the glory of God and the whole world. It has been. December will be 37 years married. And now people are asking us, how did you make it? What is the secret? There is no secret. The secret is Christ. And we ourselves made up our minds that we will live in a way that all the stories they say, what the girls do, what the Evers do, what the Fancies, it will not work in our marriage. That is what you have to do. Don't listen to these people. Live your life and enjoy your marriage.
Amen.
Amen. Great. So one more question here, and that will be the last question that I have from my end. So the question here is coming from California, and it says here, wow, thank you so much. Thank you. A lot to learn. Indeed, I agree with you, Mr. Crabbe, that the work is a lot. I have learned a lot about the subject of culture and how it affects marriages. So, can you please talk extensively on the subject of culture shock, especially those of us from Africa who ends up marrying people from different culture. I mean, people outside of the African culture. It's very tough. We have to deal with different things altogether. I'm using myself as an example. As an African man, my wife can look at me directly in the face and use a language that in Africa, if you use such a language with me, with all due respect, on your radio show, I would have slapped my wife. But in the name of being an immigrant and going through processes for documentation, one has to swallow these behaviors in order to live at peace. Please, is there anything called culture shock? And if there is, can you please talk a little about it? Because I experience something like this all the time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, culture shock simply, you would have said, being shocked by a culture. No, but okay. Culture shock comes, because we are exposed to something unfamiliar, you know. Just like you said, okay, this is not how a woman speaks to a man. So it's difficult. So culture shock, by definition, is a feeling of disorientation experienced by someone who is suddenly subjected to an unfamiliar culture. This is a dictionary definition. You know, it's a feeling of disorientation experienced by someone who is suddenly subjected to an unfamiliar culture, way of life, or set of attitudes. Okay? Now, what causes it? It's because we are unfamiliar, with that type of social interaction. That's one. Sometimes, as we said, is a different expectation. As a man, like you said, an African man, you don't expect that this is how your wife should talk with you. You see, so there is a sense of confusion. There's an uncertainty. How should I act? Sometimes there's anxiety. You see, so you often hear people have culture shock when they move from one place to the other because the way they expect things to happen don't happen. I'll give a very simple example about myself. Coming here as a student several years ago in Chicago, where I come from in Accra, Ghana, anybody you meet, you greet. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whether you know them or not. If you know them, you usually ask, how are you, or how are things going? So one of my first shocks was, one of my profs, I met the person and I say, good afternoon, and he asked me, how are you? So I proceeded to tell him something I was going through, and he walked away. Actually, he was walking while talking. Now it took me a while, and I thought, wow, this man doesn't like me. He asked me, and he didn't how I was doing. In fact, he asked, "How are you doing?" So I proceeded to tell him, something I was struggling with. But he was gone as I was talking, and later on I realized, oh, in America when they ask, "How are you doing?" they don't expect you to tell them a story like it would happen in my country when somebody, who knows you well will ask you, hey, how are things going with you, and you feel generally they want to know how you're faring. Culture shock can come in different ways. As we said, it can be the way people talk to you, the way they relate to you even, you know. Um, I've seen many people of African and Asian origin. They're shocked when little children here call him, you know, because they're expecting uncle or brother or mister, but the kids just call them by their first name and say, look at this small boy, he's calling me by John. I mean, he doesn't respect. But that's what happens here, you know? So that can be culture shock. What do you do about it? As you said a number of times this evening, it's important to raise the issues that are causing the shock. What is it? Sometimes, we might think, oh, it's new, well, I'll get over it. And then you realize you're not getting over it. And so it leads to frustration. We get frustrated. Is this how my life is going to be? And we might begin to think, well, maybe, well, you can't beat them, join them. So you may begin to speak like she speaks, but that's not you. That's going to be odd for you. You're going to struggle with it using the same language she's using, you know. So bring it up. Let her know what it makes you feel. And this is where, as spouses, we really work together with each other. Let her know how it makes you feel. You can tell her she can express her displeasure, but not using those terms. Because perhaps for her, in her culture, it's okay. But she's living with you now. She's married to you. Let her know this, not simply that it's a no-no, but this is how it makes me feel. And I would rather you use, some other terms, not this particular one, because, it's demeaning or whatever it does. And, understanding spouses that really want to work together, they will work together. You don't simply say, well, that's how I am. That's what we do in this country. So hope this helps. And it may not only be an expression, but you may find that there are other aspects of your relationship where you will need to share on this basis. And this is where we say, when we speak heart to heart, it helps us to be able to open our minds to each other, you know. So we'll encourage you to do that. Don't give up. Don't simply suck it in, but let her know this is not helpful. You want me to change or to stop something I'm doing, present it in a more constructive way. And it might be helpful that you come up with a way she can say it so that it's easier for you to take, you know. And also, there might be the need for you to come up with some positive behavior change so she doesn't talk to you like that. That's something also to consider. All right? Okay, so thank you so much for this question. So, John, you have any questions? Sam said that was his last one. Okay, Sam, anything else? If nothing else, we will be signing off.
Yes, that'll be all for my end.
Okay, so thank you all very much for spending parts of your Sunday or early Monday, depending on where you are, with us. We really appreciate this time together. We hope together we can continue to work with each other, to learn more about each other, to respect our different cultures, traditions, remembering that the person we're falling in love with is a product of where he was born, she was born, where the person has grown up, and where they now live and work. A product of a multiplicity
One
of.
quick question that is coming in, if you don't mind. Take.
Okay, all right.
The individual is typing, so just let's give it one more minute. You can continue as soon as they come in. I'll let
Okay,
you know.
okay. So this is important. Let's work with each other. Let's not simply, resign ourselves to, well, that's how they are, that's how he is, no, every one of us can improve on something. And, there are some places where so tradition never changes, but one of the things we, my wife and I have challenged some of the elders in our own families by asking them, who started this tradition? Why is it so? Asking the whys sometimes is helpful in getting some of the things reformed. And guess what? Sometime you will be an elder in your family, or maybe you already are. So why don't you bring about some positive change and begin a new tradition or reform the tradition that exists, you know, so that, for example, instead of one that looks down on women, women are held in a positive light, or in a place where, children are abused, for example, we let um, our cultures respect children more. These are things we can do. Or perhaps in a place where men are trampled upon, men are honored more. These are things we can do for each other because this is part of what makes us enjoy living with each other and being able to leave a positive legacy for those to come after us. Somebody started the tradition we came to meet. We can also reform it and pass it on to others so that we can also be blessed when we are gone. So, Sam, are you ready for us?
Yes. So the question here is, what what do you what what do you when you marry? I think what do you do when you marry into a culture where one party is not fully accepted by all the family members of the spouse's family? For example, a gentleman from Ghana not accepted fully by his wife's family from the Middle East. So the question is, what will you do?
hmm Well, the first thing, as you said, is you respect them. You know, you and do not pay back what they're doing to you. Maybe they haven't accepted you. In your way, show that you accept them and find out why they don't accept you. Maybe it's because you're not from the Middle East. Maybe because you don't speak the language. Maybe they think you won't understand their cultural practices. So it may mean you're learning about some of those practices, you see, so that you will fit in a little better, you see, so that when you are around or they are around, you will not make mistakes. You know, it helps to have your spouse also being the bridge between you and the family that may not accept you well. This is a key role that many of us have to play, to be the ambassador on behalf of your spouse. You see, sometimes advocating on their behalf, you know, pleading on their behalf that, well, he's not like you think. He may be from, Ghana, but, don't think of him like that. This is where stereotypes come in. They may have a certain mindset, and like I said, picking up some of the greetings is helpful, you see. And I was at a meeting not too long ago, and the person who opened the meeting, this was Nairobi, the person who, in Kenya, the person who opened the meeting opened with greetings in Swahili, and was like the first paragraph of his speech, you know. He's from Mexico, you see. But when he did that, there was a buzz in the room, from the Kenyans, who were there, and they responded to the greeting in Swahili, you know. So that was something, And later on, somebody thought, wow, you speak Swahili so well. I said, no, I only tried. I had somebody teach me. But it immediately created a certain acceptance. Those are things you can do. What else can you do? Find out from your spouse why they don't accept you. And if once you know those things, and if she doesn't know, she should find out. By now, I'm sure she knows. One, you have one thing in your favor. If they've allowed you to marry, that's a plus. For some people, the marriage doesn't even take place. But they've allowed you to marry, that's a plus. It means they're going to listen to her. So let her be the bridge, finding out why they don't like you. And then you and your spouse together work to clear their minds of those misconceptions, those things that trouble them. You know, that's how you let them realize that, oh, he's not the kind of person we thought he would be. That's what might draw some of them closer to you. You may not win every person on her part of the family, but there will be some who will get to know you better and they will realize that you're not the person they thought you would be. You're much better than that. And remember to do the same for your wife on your side so that they also accept her fully. This is important. It's not only one way because sometimes, when one spouse's people realize that their child is not fully accepted, they also begin to make life difficult for the one their child is married to. So make sure your wife does not get the same problems you're having, that both of you, or that at least on your side, she's accepted. Be her ambassador also, advocating for her. And for all of us, as we've realized, it's not only coming from different countries, sometimes it's the same country, sometimes it's even the same part of a particular country. But each one of us needs to understand that because of the different cultural practices and traditions we have known or that make us who we are, each of us needs to learn, respect, understand, and pull together the positive elements in those cultures, remembering that we in turn will have to have something to pass on as a legacy to our children and those after them. So thank you so much. God bless you.
So
And
before you have another question.
all right. Okay. Go on.
Let's take this one as the last question before we leave. So hello, I have a question. I'm listening to your show. My family is from Ghana, and my fiancée is from Sierra Leone. My fiancée is well educated on her cultural traditions, but my family did not teach me about my cultural of my culture until I got into a serious relationship with my fiancée. How can I respect my family's traditions and my fiancée's as well?
All right. The short answer I'll give you is once this recording is posted, listen to it again. We covered it extensively. How can you respect? That's an attitude from yourself. Remember that every culture, every tradition can have some positive element. In every traditional area, there are some positive elements we can learn and use. There are certain cultural practices that are positive. We can learn, we can use, but we need first to learn about them. Like you said, you're only now getting to learn your own Ghanaian traditions, cultural practices, from your family. She is well schooled in those. Now bring them together, see how the two of you, what values, what elements you will pull from these two cultures, the different practices you have that you will infuse into your relationship and into your marriage. That's something you can do for yourself and, for your fiancé or, and if you have the opportunity, it might be good to visit and get to know where she comes from, get to know her people, and for her also to visit Ghana, get to know your people, so that at least you really have a good idea of how relationships go, because I'm thinking it that you've met outside, both countries, perhaps, and so you may not fully be immersed in that. Being there, even a week, 2 weeks, begins to open your mind as to how things work with people, how people relate, and will help you both going forward. So we'll encourage you to do it. Congratulations. Hope you do well.
Take your time to learn from each other's culture. Begin to respect each other's culture. Even if you didn't know it before, you are now getting to know some things. It's never too late. Take your time, learn, and even ask questions if you don't understand something. Respect each other's culture, and you can move on fine.
Oh, thank you. You raised the issue of asking questions. And we ask questions with a view of finding out and learning. not with a view to judge the particular, practice or behavior. So you ask, why do you do things this way? You know, so you can learn. It's not you shouldn't do things that way. you know, First, learn, understand before you make any pronouncement. All right. Sammy, I'm not going to say thank you now. You might spring another surprise, so I'm waiting.
This time you can say thank you.
All right, then. Thank you, Be Inspired Podcast Network. Sam, you and your team, you're fabulous, and you make us go all around the world. We're really thankful to you and your engineering team, and as well as John and his colleagues on the DC line who work the phone lines and bring us to the rest of the world. We're really grateful to all of you, wishing you all the best for the rest of the month, and God willing, we'll be together the third Sunday of December. God bless. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Bye for now.